Hi, it's Gary. Welcome to today's video. Well, from being a young kid, I've always liked Spider-Man. I can remember religiously walking to the newsagents to pick up the latest comic and then sitting down to read the adventures. One of the things that always amazed me was, well, how can Spider-Man climb walls? Now, yes, I know, spiders, they can walk on walls and ceilings, but it always felt weird to me that a human could do that. And yes, I do know, Spider-Man is only make-believe. Well, up till this day, the question still pops into my mind from time to time, especially when I've been watching one of the latest movies. Just how can Spider-Man climb up walls? So I thought, well, let's try and answer that question. Over the years, scientists, they've been investigating how spiders and other small animals are able to walk up walls. And they've found a couple of mechanisms, but the one that's relevant for spiders, and so Spider-Man, is the Van der Waals force. Now, before we talk about this Van der Waals force, let's first look at what has been found so far. Scientists used really powerful microscopes, and they found that on the feet of spiders, there's tufts of hair. Each of these tufts, they're made up of thousands of finer hairs called setioles. These, they're just a few nanometers in width. That's really thin. That's roughly 100 times thinner than a human hair. The end of these setioles, they spread out a little bit, so they end up looking a little bit like a spatula. An average spider, they have about 600,000 of these on each foot. And that's important because that's what enables them to walk on walls. Because these setioles are so thin, they're able to get very close to the surface that the spider's walking on. And this is what lets the Van der Waals force work. So what is this Van der Waals force? Well, if we go for the scientific definition, it's the force of attraction based on positive and negative charges of individual molecules when the molecules are within nanometers of each other. It sounds a bit like gobbledygook in a way, doesn't it? But in other words, because the surface is so close, the surface and the setiole, they attract each other, they pull on each other, and that's what makes the sticking action that lets these two items be temporarily joined so the spider can walk on the wall. Each of the hairs, each of these setioles, they've only got a tiny little bit of stickiness. But because there's lots of them, and that's why the number's important, it means it adds up and it gives enough to support the spider's weight. In fact, scientists, they've found that because of the number of setioles, a spider could hold up to 173 times its body weight. That's a massive amount, isn't it? When you think it's only these tiny little hairs doing that. So could something like this work for humans? Well, the first thing we need to do is look at the scaling law. And this, it was discovered by Galileo in 1638. And this, it's a law that describes how two properties grow with each other as they get bigger. In terms of animals, and for what we're talking about today, we want to look at surface area and volume. Now, the surface area, that's the amount of surface that covers something. In terms of animals, so humans, spiders, the surface area, that's the amount of surface that is covered by your skin, but not just your skin, also your hair. The volume, that's the amount of space that's been taken up. And so for humans and spiders, that's how big the body is. In other words, what we're talking about here is the ratio of the skin and hairs compared to how big it is. Remember, we said there was 600,000 hairs. That's increasing the surface area by a massive amount. For small animals, they've got a very small surface area and volume. But when you look at the ratio, when you compare them against each other, they've got a very large surface area to volume ratio. As animals get bigger, the surface area and the volume, well, they increase, but the surface area to volume, that gets lower. So an elephant, it's got a smaller surface area, than a spider does. When we look at spiders and we look at how they're walking, they're not putting the whole body on the wall, are they? They're only putting their feet. And this again is where all those concentrated little setiules, those little hairs on the feet, come into play. By having hundreds of thousands of these small hairs, it means they've got quite a large surface area on their feet. So scientists, they've done even more work, and they investigated the amount of body covered by setiules and these little tiny hairs. And what they found is that as animals get bigger, the amount of body that is covered by them needs to increase to let them carry on walking on walls. Some examples here. A mite, those little tiny flies, 0.02% of their body is sticky. For a spider, it's 0.92%. And for a gecko, 4.3%. What they also found is that the gecko, that's the largest animal that can use this Van der Waals force, use these little hairs on the feet to climb up walls. Now, could it get larger? Well, it is possible, and this is where we start to look at Spider-Man. For a human to be able to climb a wall, it's estimated that roughly 40% of their body needs to be covered by these setiules. So imagine Spider-Man's coming along, he wants to climb the wall. To have 40% of his body covered in these, he needs to have his hands and his feet to be 1 metre by 40 centimetres large. Just imagine that, those massive feet and those massive hands. Can you think about it? How easy would it be to eat? It wouldn't, would it? Because you'd be struggling to get food in your mouth. How about walking? Can you just imagine trying to walk with a pair of feet that's 1 metre long? And then running? Well, I wouldn't even want to think about that. The other thing, for him to be able to climb a wall, well, he wouldn't be able to wear gloves, wouldn't be able to wear shoes and socks. His hands and feet would need to be in contact with the wall. So he's going to be climbing there with no gloves, no shoes and socks. Imagine if you're sweaty, imagine if it's really cold. That's not going to be very comfortable. To summarise, yep, small animals, they can quite easily walk on walls. They've got all these little tiny hairs on their feet that enables them to use Van der Waals forces to stick to the walls. But it only works for really small animals. Once you get above the size of a gecko, your surface area to volume ratio, it's just too small. So for a human, 40% of their body needs to be covered with these. That means feet, 1 metre by 40 centimetres. Means hands, 1 metre by 40 centimetres. And that's just not practical. But I'm going to be honest, I don't care. I enjoy watching the Spider-Man films. I enjoy watching the Spider-Man cartoons. I enjoy reading the Spider-Man comics. The thought of Spider-Man swinging through the cities and climbing buildings is just really nice, isn't it? I hope you've enjoyed today's video. Have you got any questions that you'd like to be answered? Please drop a comment down below and I'll see if I can answer them. Please hit the thumbs up button. Every time you like, every time you comment, just helps with the YouTube algorithm. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel so that you can get new videos as I release them. I'll talk to you again soon.